Lila had spent her entire life being told she was too ordinary. The words weren't always cruel, often masked with a polite smile or a casual shrug, but they left invisible bruises, from childhood birthdays where classmates showed off expensive gifts while she nervously unwrapped a small, thoughtful present, to high school classrooms where teachers glossed over her questions as if they were unimportant. The message was always the same. She didn't stand out. She was ordinary, invisible, forgettable. Even her family couldn't escape the pattern. At gatherings, relatives would pat her on the head with hollow praise, saying things like, "That's nice, Lila," barely looking up from their phones or conversations. They never noticed the quiet determination in her eyes, the hours she spent reading, experimenting, and dreaming. She had always known she was different inside, but the world seemed intent on telling her otherwise. High school was a particular battlefield. Lila had fallen in love with science early on, fascinated by genetics and the mysteries locked within our DNA. She spent long evenings poring over textbooks, conducting small experiments at home, and dreaming of a future where she could uncover something truly remarkable. One day, during a group discussion about career aspirations, a classmate sneered, "You? Science? Don't kid yourself. You're too plain for that." Lila had felt a stab of humiliation, but she smiled, pretending it didn't matter. Inside, the fire had ignited. If they were determined to call her ordinary, she would show them what ordinary could really do. College offered a slight reprieve. Lila excelled in her classes, earning top grades and the occasional nod of recognition from professors who could see her brilliance. But the whispers of doubt never fully went away. During lab sessions, her peers would dismiss her ideas or repeat them as their own. She learned quickly how to keep her head down and let her work speak for itself. Yet every slight, every overlooked comment was another brick added to a wall she was determined to climb over. After graduation, Lila's first job as a research assistant at a respected medical lab seemed like a dream come true. The work was challenging, intellectually stimulating, and aligned perfectly with her passions. Yet, even here, the pattern repeated. During team meetings, her observations were often ignored until someone else repeated them, earning praise. She had grown accustomed to the quiet frustration, the sense that no matter how much she achieved, it would never be enough to break the label of ordinary. The opportunity that would change everything arrived unexpectedly. The National Genetics Institute announced a study offering participants detailed DNA analysis, promising insights into ancestry, rare genetic traits, and unique predispositions. Lila registered immediately, curious but skeptical. She expected nothing extraordinary. After all, World had spent decades telling her she was ordinary. The lab coordinator, a senior geneticist with a wry smile, glanced at her registration form and said casually, "Don't get your hopes up. Most people don't find anything remarkable." Lila clenched her fists behind her back, forcing a polite smile. The familiar sting of doubt was nothing new. The day of the analysis arrived, and Lila walked into the lab with a mixture of excitement and nerve. Scientists in crisp white coats moved with precise efficiency, handling vials and machines with quiet authority. She handed over her sample, observing the meticulous process as technicians labeled and scanned it. Around her, other participants chatted nervously, occasionally glancing at her as if she didn't belong. The subtle judgment was familiar, but this time, it felt different. Something inside her whispered that this moment could change everything. When the results were finally revealed on the large screen in the presentation room, the atmosphere was casual, almost bored. Scientists discussed minor variations in other participants' DNA, nodding politely at ancestral markers and harmless mutations. Lila's heart raced as her name was called. She braced herself for the expected confirmation of ordinariness, a shrug-worthy readout. What appeared on the screen, however, silenced the room. Her DNA revealed rare genetic markers linked to exceptional cognitive abilities, unique physiological traits, and ancestral lineage that spanned continents and connected to historically influential figures. Whispers turned into gasps. Scientists huddled together, pointing at charts and sequences in disbelief. One technician muttered, "Is this even possible?" The lead geneticist's hands trembled as he scrolled through the data. We need to verify this. This isn't supposed to happen," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and confusion. Lila sat frozen, staring at the screen, the weight of years of dismissal finally colliding with irrefutable proof. Her entire life of being overlooked, ridiculed, and underestimated had been based on a lie, the lie of others' perception, the assumption that ordinary appearances equaled ordinary potential. The room that had once been filled with polite, dismissive conversation now vibrated with astonishment. Every person who had doubted her, every voice that had whispered ordinary, now faced the undeniable truth. Lila was extraordinary. The realization didn't hit her all at once. It crept in slowly, weaving through the disbelief and awe around her. This was no longer about proving others wrong. This was about validating herself, about finally understanding the full measure of her own potential. Her DNA was a map, a testament to untapped capability, to hidden resilience, and to a history of brilliance that stretched far beyond what anyone had assumed. As murmurs continued, Lila felt a quiet satisfaction. The irony was delicious. Every person who had laughed, dismissed, or underestimated her was now grappling with a reality they hadn't anticipated. For the first time, she wasn't just invisible. She was visible, not because she demanded it, but because the truth of her existence was undeniable, tangible, and awe-inspiring. By the time the lab staff left the presentation room, Lila remained seated, absorbing the enormity of the moment. She knew that this was just the beginning. The label of ordinary had been stripped away, replaced with a truth that even science could not deny. And as she left the lab that day, her chest full of quiet pride, she carried with her a single, unwavering thought. The world had underestimated her for too long, and now it would finally see her for who she truly was. The day after Lila's DNA results went public, her phone became a relentless stream of notifications. Emails, calls, and messages poured in from friends, acquaintances, and even former classmates she hadn't spoken to in years. "Is it true?" One text read, trembling with disbelief. "They always said you were ordinary. How?" Another message arrived from a college friend who had once mocked her ambition. "I can't believe this. You're extraordinary." Lila stared at the glowing screen, a strange mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion washing over her. She had expected surprise, maybe even admiration, but the sheer scale of the attention was overwhelming. At first, she tried to ignore it, focusing on her work at the lab. Yet even there, things had changed. Colleagues who had dismissed her contributions now regarded her with a newfound respect, subtly seeking her input on projects and experiments. Meetings that once felt like silent battles to be heard now became platforms where her voice carried weight. Lila realized that the moment of recognition was not about proving others wrong. It was about stepping fully into her own potential. The world was finally listening, and she would make it count. The National Genetics Institute invited her back for further study. This time, dozens of researchers crowded into the lab, their curiosity palpable. They examined every strand of her genome, comparing it to extensive databases, and the results were even more astonishing. Lila's DNA contained rare mutations linked to exceptional problem-solving skills, extraordinary memory retention, and heightened adaptability. Her ancestral lineage traced back to several historical innovators, people who had reshaped science and leadership across continents. The evidence left the team speechless. Lila sat quietly, absorbing their astonishment while suppressing the flicker of vindication she felt. Scientific publications and academic journals quickly caught wind of her case. Requests for interviews flooded in, and conference organizers invited her to speak about her unique genetic profile. For the first time in her life, Lila's abilities and accomplishments were recognized openly. Her story, once dismissed as ordinary, became a beacon of inspiration for young scientists and dreamers. Invitations poured in from universities, tech firms, and even research foundations, eager to collaborate or learn from someone who had been underestimated her entire life. Despite the sudden attention, Lila remained grounded. She understood that fame and recognition were fleeting. What mattered was how she leveraged her knowledge and opportunities. She began speaking at workshops and seminars, sharing both the scientific insights of her DNA result and the personal journey that had brought her to this point. Her talks resonated deeply, particularly with those who had been underestimated or marginalized. Being called ordinary doesn't define your potential, she told one audience. It's what you do with what you have that defines you. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Students and young professionals approached her with questions about science, personal growth, and resilience. She fielded inquiries about her research, her academic strategies, and even the emotional resilience required to navigate a lifetime of doubt. With every interaction, Lila realized that her journey was no longer about herself. It was about inspiring others to see beyond labels and challenge the limitations imposed by society. Even her family began to react. Jenna, Lila's older sister, had long occupied the role of the successful one in their household. For years, she had subtly overshadowed Lila, sometimes with kindness, sometimes with condescension. But when Jenna saw Lila's name in scientific journals and heard the story on a national news segment, her disbelief was palpable. She called Lila that evening, voice tight with a mix of awe and regret. I didn't know, she admitted. I always thought, I don't know. I thought you were just ordinary. Lila listened silently, the years of dismissal flashing through her mind. She didn't need an apology. She had already proven it through her work, but a quiet acknowledgement of the truth was enough for now. Beyond family and academia, the media took notice. Articles praised her as the ordinary woman with extraordinary DNA, while social media buzzed with hashtags celebrating her achievements. Lila was interviewed on podcasts, featured in online science magazines, and invited to contribute to panel discussions about genetics and human potential. She marveled at the irony. Those who had once laughed at her underachievement were now trying to connect, network, and even learn from her insight. Some old classmates even reached out, cautiously apologetic, attempting to rekindle lost connections. She replied politely but kept her distance. Lila had learned that recognition didn't require validation from the very people who had doubted her. Amid all this attention, Lila maintained her daily routine. She returned to the lab with renewed focus, diving into new research projects with a vigor she had never known. The curiosity that had once been mocked as pointless fascination now became her driving force. She explored genetic traits, cognitive enhancement, and ancestral patterns, uncovering insights that challenged conventional understanding. Every experiment reinforced her belief that extraordinary potential often lies hidden beneath unassuming appearances, waiting for opportunity and persistence to reveal it. Yet, the most profound impact of her revelation came in quiet, personal moments. Lila saw the change not in headlines or social media, but in the eyes of those who had doubted her. She watched a young student tremble before asking a question she herself had once feared to voice. Inspired by her example, she observed colleagues approaching her with respect and eagerness to collaborate, rather than dismissal or indifference. The world had underestimated her for too long, and now it had no choice but to see her as she truly was: capable, brilliant, and extraordinary. By the end of the week, Lila understood that her life had irreversibly shifted. The label of ordinary no longer applied. She had turned ridicule into recognition, doubt into opportunity, and invisibility into influence. As she walked home from the lab that evening, the sunset casting a golden glow across the city, Lila smiled quietly to herself. The journey was only beginning. She had been underestimated her entire life, but now she would chart her own path, one extraordinary step at a time. Lila's newfound recognition spread like wildfire, and with it came an unexpected consequence: confrontation. People who had dismissed her, laughed at her, or labeled her ordinary were suddenly eager to acknowledge her success, or at least pretend they had always known she was exceptional. Some reached out with hesitant apologies, others with thinly veiled envy. But one day, an invitation arrived that changed everything: a reunion organized by her old high school. The event was held in the very gymnasium where Lila had spent countless afternoons feeling invisible. Posters on the walls, tattered but familiar, heralded it as a celebration of alumni achievements. Lila knew most of the attendees would be those who had doubted her, but she accepted the invitation with a quiet determination. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about closure and showing that ordinary was a word they could no longer use. The moment she entered the gym, Whispers rippled through the crowd. Conversations paused mid-sentence, eyes turned, and heads tilted in disbelief. Lila walked with measured confidence, her posture straight, her gaze steady. She wore a simple, elegant dress, not flashy, not trying to impress, but one that radiated quiet authority. She had changed, not just in accomplishments, but in presence. The girl they had overlooked for years now carried herself like someone who owned the room, even if she hadn't yet taken the stage. As the evening progressed, alumni took turns sharing their achievements. When Lila's name was announced, the room fell into stunned silence. Her accomplishments, her groundbreaking genetic research, and the revelation of her rare DNA were detailed in front of everyone. She watched as former classmates' faces shifted from polite nods to open amazement. Some jaws dropped, others exchanged whispered disbelief. It was as though the universe itself had rewritten their assumptions about her overnight. Then came the most unexpected encounter. Jenna, her older sister, standing near the refreshment table. Lila hadn't seen her approach, but now they were face to face. Jenna's expression was a mixture of pride, regret, and an unmistakable twinge of guilt. "Lila," she said softly, almost breathless, I didn't know it was this extraordinary. I never realized." Her voice faltered. Lila's heart skipped. For years, Jenna had been a subtle critic, someone whose approval she secretly craved but rarely received. Now, seeing the awe and respect in her sister's eyes, she felt a complex mix of vindication and empathy. "You doubted me," Lila said calmly, her voice steady. "You told me I was ordinary, but I'm not asking for your approval now. I'm showing you what was always possible." Jenna nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I see it now. I was wrong. You were never ordinary. I'm proud of you." Lila offered a small smile, accepting the acknowledgement without surrendering the power she had earned. It wasn't about forgiveness, it was about recognition. And finally, the truth had been laid bare. Beyond family, other faces she had once known shifted in the crowd. Teachers who had skimmed over her questions, classmates who had mocked her curiosity, and even old friends who had dismissed her ideas now approached hesitantly, trying to mask their awe with casual conversation. "Lila, I heard about your DNA study. Incredible," one exclaimed, voice tinged with disbelief. "I always thought you had potential," another added, nervously laughing. Lila nodded politely, answering questions with a composed, gentle authority. She had learned that humility and confidence could coexist, and in that balance, she held the true power. The evening took a dramatic turn when the reunion organizers invited her to speak. Lila stepped onto the stage, the microphone trembling slightly in her hand as dozens of familiar and unfamiliar faces looked up at her. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the crowd. Every whisper of doubt, every snicker from the past, seemed to fade in that moment. The room was silent, waiting for the girl they had dismissed to speak. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice calm but resonant. "I know many of you remember me as ordinary, quiet, invisible. But the truth is, ordinary was never the right word. What you called ordinary was simply potential waiting for the right moment to be revealed." The audience shifted, leaning in. Lila continued, her tone both commanding and inspiring. "For years I was overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. I could have let that define me, but instead, I used it as fuel to learn, to grow, and to discover who I truly am." Her story unfolded, the years of study, the countless hours in labs, the obstacles she had overcome, and finally, the moment when her DNA results proved what she had always known in her heart. As she spoke, faces in the audience transformed. Skepticism gave way to admiration, condescension gave way to awe, and some of the harshest critics, her former classmates and teachers, sat silently, unable to dispute the evidence of her extraordinary potential. By the time she concluded, the gymnasium erupted into applause. Lila's heart swelled not with pride, but with satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. She had transformed herself from the girl they laughed at into a woman whose accomplishments were undeniable. The label of ordinary no longer applied. She had shattered it with intellect, perseverance, and courage. As the crowd dispersed, several people lingered, wanting to speak with her one-on-one. Lila engaged with each politely, offering advice, encouragement, and mentorship where she could. She realized that her journey had grown beyond personal validation. It had become a platform for inspiring others to challenge assumptions, embrace their potential, and pursue excellence, regardless of how the world might label them. By the time the night ended, Lila stepped outside into the crisp evening air, the cool breeze carrying away years of doubt and frustration. Her name had echoed through the gym, once a whisper of ridicule, now a statement of undeniable truth. She smiled quietly to herself, knowing that this was not the end of her journey. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where the extraordinary within her would continue to shine, and where she could finally define herself on her own terms. The days following the high school reunion were unlike anything Lila had experienced. She was no longer just a scientist in a lab. She was a symbol of unexpected brilliance, a living example of potential recognized too late by those who had doubted her. Invitations to speak at conferences, collaborate with research institutions, and join prestigious panels poured in. But Lila approached each opportunity with a careful balance. She wanted to share her knowledge, inspire others, and assert her influence, but she would not allow herself to be used as a trophy or a spectacle. One afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at her lab. Dr. Samuel Hayes, a leading figure in genetics. He had followed Lila's work for months, intrigued by both her DNA profile and her groundbreaking experiments. Lila, your research is rewriting what we thought we knew about cognitive traits and adaptability, he said, eyes bright with admiration. We want you leading a new initiative, one that could influence genetic research on a global scale. Lila's pulse quickened. This was the opportunity she had worked for her entire life, to not only prove herself, but to shape the field itself. Yet the recognition also brought challenges. Some colleagues, envious of her sudden visibility, attempted to undermine her, questioning her methods or exaggerating minor mistakes. Lila faced these with calm confidence, allowing her work to speak for itself. Every experiment completed successfully, every paper published with rigor, every discovery confirmed. These became her answers. Her critics' whispers faded as the undeniable impact of her contributions became impossible to ignore. Even personal relationships shifted. Jenna, her sister, now approached her not as a rival, but as an ally. I want to understand, to be part of what you're building, Jenna said one evening over coffee. Lila smiled gently. There's room for support, yes, she said, but I learned long ago that validation has to come from within. What others think is secondary. What matters is what you do with your abilities. Jenna nodded, a quiet respect now replacing the subtle superiority that had once defined their interactions. The public fascination with Lila's DNA results became a platform for education and empowerment. She appeared on talk shows, webinars, and science expos, speaking not about being extraordinary, but about uncovering potential, resilience, and the courage to embrace one's uniqueness. Each appearance reinforced a simple message: labels don't define you. Effort, curiosity, and persistence do. Lila's story began to shift cultural perceptions, showing young students, particularly girls in STEM, that being underestimated could be the catalyst for transformation rather than defeat. In parallel, Lila's research continued to yield groundbreaking discoveries. Her team mapped previously unknown correlations between rare genetic markers and cognitive flexibility, problem-solving skills, and adaptive memory. Their findings drew the attention of international journals, universities, and even governments looking to understand human potential on a broader scale. Every paper she published, every study she led, cemented her reputation not as a novelty, but as a pioneering scientist. Yet even with the acclaim and recognition, Lila remained grounded. She knew that the world's gaze was fleeting, and that true impact was measured not by applause, but by enduring contributions. She mentored young scientists, established scholarships for underrepresented students, and funded research projects that might have been overlooked by traditional funding bodies. Each initiative was a deliberate effort to ensure that potential, like hers, would not be dismissed or labeled as ordinary again. Months later, Lila returned to her high school, this time to inaugurate a new science lab named in her honor. The auditorium was filled with students, teachers, and alumni who had once doubted her. She spoke to them not as a guest of honor, but as a guide, emphasizing curiosity, resilience, and the power of persistence. You may be underestimated, she told them. You may be told you're ordinary, but that doesn't define your life. How you respond, how you grow, and how you pursue your dreams defines everything. Don't wait for permission to be extraordinary. Claim it for yourself. The room erupted in applause, but Lila's satisfaction came not from the noise, but from the recognition in the eyes of students whose journeys she might now influence. Then came a final poignant moment. Lila received a private note from a former teacher, the one who had often questioned her abilities during her school years. I see now what I failed to recognize, the note read. Your persistence, intellect, and courage were evident even then. Thank you for showing me, and everyone else, that ordinary is just a word. Lila held the note close, feeling a quiet satisfaction. She didn't need apologies or admiration to validate her journey. Her life and achievements had already spoken. In the quiet of her lab that evening, Lila reflected on the path that had brought her here. Years of doubt, ridicule, and dismissal had forged her resilience. Every sneer, every laugh at her supposed ordinariness had become fuel for her determination. She had turned invisibility into influence, ridicule into recognition, and skepticism into inspiration. The girl once overlooked had become a leader, a mentor, and a catalyst for change. Finally, Lila looked at her reflection in the lab window, city lights sparkling behind her. The face staring back was calm, confident, and filled with quiet power. No longer would anyone mistake her for ordinary. She had claimed her legacy, not by accident but by relentless pursuit, unwavering focus, and the courage to believe in herself when no one else did. And as she turned back to her research, she knew that this was only the beginning. The world had finally seen her for who she truly was, but now she would help others see themselves too.